Alright YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and for today's video, we're going to be looking at a couple of details when it comes to the development process of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and if you don't know what this is, we're looking at the Final Fantasy VII Remake Revisited, which is something that they started up, I think, the day of the 25th anniversary, June 16th, and week by week, they're going chapter by chapter, and kind of discussing the development process that went into making each chapter. But I'll be honest, at least with the first two Revisiteds, Chapter 1, Chapter 2 of the game, there's not a whole lot of talking points. There are some stuff we're going to touch on, but the main thing that we're here to talk about, at least with this video, is Chapter 3. And the Chapter 3 Revisited, they talk about the Tifa cut content, which became a pretty popular topic on Twitter yesterday whenever they dropped those. So, of course, we're going to start with the Chapter 1 things that we want to talk about. There's really only one thing I want to discuss. Like, there's a lot of stuff here that's can be interesting. Like, they talk about, like, the posters and signage that are within Chapter 1, and, like, how that was made, how that was designed, stuff like that. The laser minigame and Jesse's banter during it. The Scorpion Sentinel and how it takes aspects of the Guard Scorpion from the original FF7. But it's like, these are all stuff that we kind of already know, right? Like, the Scorpion Sentinel had to be expanded upon. They couldn't just mimic what the, Guard Scorpion did in the original FF7. It just wouldn't translate very well to this style of combat. But the one thing I do want to talk about is them discussing Cloud's stance when it comes to Punisher mode, and whether or not it's actually, like, him paying homage to Sephiroth, who, of course, used to be, like, a hero he looked up to and shit. And their answer is pretty much no. As Cloud switches to Punisher mode, it looks as though he takes up a stance similar to how Sephiroth fights in the original Final Fantasy VII. Is this intentional? If so, is this something he learned from his time in Soldier, or him imitating his ex-hero? We didn't specifically set out to imply a detail like that. We just wanted something that would clearly look different from Cloud's regular stance to get across the fact that he changed attack modes. We collaborated with the motion designers to find a ready position that would look good and flow easily into blocks and attacks, while also fitting with Cloud's personality. The fact that it is a logical stance to take may well have resulted in it resembling Sephiroth's style in the end. Here's my thing with this. Here's my thoughts. Why not just say that that's why he does it? Why not give it a purpose? Why not give a lore reason as to why he's doing Punisher mode? He's trying to imitate Sephiroth, somebody he used to look up to. Even if he doesn't realize it, like, subconsciously, he's trying to be as strong as Sephiroth, because Cloud is a beast when he's in Punisher mode, right? That would make sense that he's trying to imitate this dude he used to look up to, and he would have seen Sephiroth fight like that, because Sephiroth does hold his sword similar to how Cloud holds it in Punisher mode. Now, the stances aren't one-to-one similar. For one, Cloud kind of crouches whenever he's in Punisher mode, but he also has his left shoulder out first, whereas when it comes to Sephiroth, he stands tall in the stance, but he also stands with his right shoulder out first. From what we've seen throughout the compilation, I think Sephiroth is more or less ambidextrous, so he could probably stand either way if he wanted to, but this is usually how he stands. But Cloud doing it differently than Sephiroth actually makes sense. For one, he may not even realize that he's imitating Sephiroth, but also we see him, like, wield the Buster Sword differently than Zack, right? Whenever he has the Buster Sword on his back, he has the sharp part of the Buster Sword facing to the left, whereas Zack did it to the right, and Angela as well. So maybe this is another thing of him, like, trying to imitate somebody but not realizing that he's doing it and doing it wrong. Or at least wielding it differently, whatever you want to say. But either way, man, they could have, again, given it a purpose, given it a lore reason. Why not, dude? It literally doesn't hurt, it only helps. And it would have been fascinating if we're playing through Remake and going through, like, Rebirth and all this other shit, and Cloud's doing Punisher mode and kicking everybody's ass, and it ends up that he's imitating somebody that he used to look up to that he now absolutely despises because of what he did in Nibelheim. Could have been fascinating. Missed opportunity, in my opinion. Now, in Chapter 2 Revisited, again, I don't think there's a whole lot worth discussing, but they do talk about the materia system and, what the devs were using, and if any of the dev team were impressed by some of the combinations that fans use, and the reply was, as you would expect, there are the classics that a lot of team equip, such as Magnify and Elemental. Many of them also actively use materia that increases the ATB gauge, like ATB Assist. I don't think I saw too many unexpected combinations, but in hindsight, that might have meant the breadth of the system was a little too narrow, so I'll take it as a challenge to improve upon next time. That's not a super groundbreaking quote or anything, but I like the fact that they want to improve the materia system going forward. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it when it comes to Part 1. I personally could have used more copies of certain materia. That would have been nice, especially on, like, a second playthrough, third playthrough, hard mode playthrough, whatever. Like, it'd be nice to have a little more fun with the game, more options. I don't know if you can hear these fireworks in the background. It's kind of annoying. But it's nice going forward that they want to make it maybe a more in-depth materia system similar to what the original FF7 had. You can do some interesting stuff with the Remake, but it definitely is not the same. No. I want to read this really quickly, too. Fans who played the original Final Fantasy VII were very surprised to see Sephiroth appear so early in the game and taunt Cloud. Why did the team decide to add Sephiroth into the story so early? Is it a way of showing us Cloud's vulnerable side early on? There was the intention to show the effect that a most likely imagined Sephiroth had on Cloud's mind at an early stage, but his earlier appearance was also because his existence had a massive influence on the world of Remake itself. Part of me wanted to read that because people were sharing that quote the other week about, Sephiroth appearing earlier is having a massive impact on the world of Remake. Like, it was some revelation. Like, we know this, man. We've been knowing this, right? We were actually talking about this and discussing this back in, like, the 2019 reveals and trailers and shit. because we're seeing Sephiroth in the trailers. You don't see Sephiroth at Midgar, right? You don't visually see Sephiroth until the cargo ship, the original FF7. You don't actually see actual Sephiroth until, of course, North Crater. So seeing Sephiroth at all in these trailers was like a big deal. Like, how's that going to affect and change the story? Like, this is nothing new. That being said, maybe it's nice to have like a dev confirmation that Sephiroth being there earlier is influencing the world of Remake or whatever the case. But again, we've all been knowing this for a long time now, so it's not really anything new. Now moving on to the Chapter 3 Revisited. Now before we get into the Tifa shit, there's one thing I want to read. They have a quote that's kind of interesting about the black cloaked figures. And it says, "Can you tell us anything about Mako, in particular his backstory and how he came to have the number 49 tattooed on him? The black cloaked figures are all victims of extreme Mako poisoning and are scattered around the world. Rather than focus on their individual identities, they represent the overall image of a mysterious group. Going forward, there will be more black-cloaked characters appearing than in the original, and we will reveal more details of their predicament." Now, I assume when it comes to Remake, they were probably doing the reunion shit, right? It's probably going to be a very similar thing for the most part. So I don't know why they're being kind of coy about it. Like, you could just say that. Like, the majority of people that are going to be reading these interviews and these articles and shit are going to be people that are fans of OG FF7, but also Remake. We already know what reunion theory is, so there's no reason to be, like, shy about it or whatever, unless they're going to do something different, which is maybe a possibility. The vision of reunion we get is clearly from the original FF7. It's whirlwind maze, spiky rocks in the background, you see the wind blowing, all that other shit, but it doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. Like, Sephiroth could have a different idea or theory, or even Genova, whoever, maybe they want to have reunion somewhere else, potentially. I don't know what they could do, right? But I do like that they talk about the fact that the clones are all over the world, which in the original FF7, it's not really the case, right? I think the majority of them are in Nibelheim, and you see some within Midgar. I don't remember if you see them anywhere else. There could be that I'm just not thinking of. There's one, I think, that like exits the Temple of the Ancients and dies or something like that. But for the most part, it's just like a couple locations. So I think going forward, they talk about there being more in the world, that maybe we're going to have them potentially in every town. It'd be kind of cool. Like if you go to like Junon and Costa del Sol and stuff, like almost every town could have like a Sephiroth clone, so that you really feel the impact of reunion theory. Like these motherfuckers are everywhere. Alright, on to the Tifa shit. We're just going to read this whole thing really quickly and then we'll talk. In the original Final Fantasy VII, you can visit the area under 7th Heaven, but this was removed for Final Fantasy VII Remake. Is there a reason for it? In Chapter 3, Cloud is more distant from Avalanche members than he was in the original game, so he made it that he was not allowed into the underground hideout. Having group meetings that only full Avalanche members are invited to, and Cloud being left out in the celebration of the successful bomb mission, etc., depicted the loneliness of a situation. However, there's more to the story, as during development we had actually planned for a section between Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 where the player controlled Tifa and could experience the events leading up to her infiltrating Don Corneo's wife auditions. That section would have featured the inside of the Avalanche base. It was developed to a point where the section was joined up and playable, but we were concerned that having a separate story as an interlude after Cloud falls from Reactor 5 and is reunited with Aerith in the church would damage the tempo of the storytelling. So we ultimately decided to remove that part. I think it would be great to show Tifa's side of the story if we get a chance at some point. So this is something we talked about in the past before. I've probably done a video or two discussing the cut Tifa chapter. It's kind of what we always called it, but from what we got here with this answer, I don't think it was that much of content. I don't know how long, right? We don't know how much. I know it was supposed to feature like Marlene, Jesse, and of course Tifa, maybe some other like smaller members that we don't get as much time with in the remake story. But for the most part, I don't think it would have been enough to warrant a DLC. It's not definitely enough for its own chapter. It was an interlude between Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. Now, as for it throwing off the balance of the story, whatever the case, I think that's kind of ridiculous. I don't think that makes any sense at all. And the fact that it was fully done and integrated and playable, and then they just took it out because of quote-unquote pacing issues, I think is ridiculous as fuck. At the very least, if it was fully done and playable, and you had like the Avalanche like hideout like fully designed and stuff like that, like why not just make a cutscene somewhere that shows characters down there talking, just to show the fans the hideout? Because for as small of a location as it is with the original FF7, it's also a very iconic location. And the fact that we didn't see it at all with the remake story, again, ridiculous. Now, this all being said, I've mentioned this in the past too, probably in one of the videos I've done on this topic. What would a Tifa focused DLC that leads up to the Don Corneo shit really add to the overall remake story, right? Like, is there going to be some sort of massive revelation that's going to come back later to haunt us? Is Tifa going to meet characters or learn information that's going to, show up later in the story? Or is it strictly just her planning to go infiltrate Don Corneo's hideout? Because if it is, man, we don't really need it. Do we want it? Sure. But it's not really adding anything to the story. Plus, we learned a long time ago from, like, Nomura that they're not going to do DLC until Part 2 is done, right? So you got to think that if this was going to be a DLC that was going to come out, it's not going to come out until post-Rebirth. And by the time we get done with Rebirth, we're like potentially, Nibelheim or Forgotten Capital or the North Crater or something like that. We're far into the world and the story for FF7. I don't really need DLC that takes me all the way back to Midgar and it's just Tifa trying to get some dresses to go to Don Corneo's house. Don't need it. Now, me saying all that, I'm not against them giving us this Tifa shit at some point. Even when the dev says at the end of that quote, I think it would be great to show Tifa's side of the story if we get a chance at some point. The thing is, if we're basing it off of OG FF7, we're going to see Don Corneo again later, right? We see him in Wu-Tai with OG FF7. So there's going to be later Don Corneo stuff. So they could incorporate this Tifa shit at a later point somehow, even if it's just a flashback cutscene that we see of her talking to characters and planning shit out, or if it's a playable flashback, they could bring it up at some point. And the fact that one of the devs wants to show that shit at some point means that we could see it. But as of right now, man, it's been like over 2 years at this point. By the time Rebirth is done, it'll be like 3+ years or some shit. Like, it's been too long, right? But I'm down for it if they want to show it. I just don't know how they're going to do it. And there's actually one more Tifa-related thing from this Chapter 3 Revisited, and it's involving minigames. They talk about the darts minigame, which is whatever. It was fun, but once you like get the high score, it's whatever. You don't need to play it again. And it never comes up again. You never see it again. They talk about how with the cut Tifa content, there was initially going to be a minigame in the basement where Tifa could train her combat and her fighting on a punching bag. Specifically, they say, in terms of minigames that were rejected, this also relates to the answer to question 2 above, as we did consider having a punching bag on the wall of the underground hideout which Tifa could train with. I thought that was kind of interesting, because I don't know what that minigame would have been. Like, you're hitting the punching bag, right? But is it like are you trying to get like a high score? Or are you trying to do so many combos and hits in a certain amount of time? Is it just practice so that you can get better with Tifa's combat for when you're actually fighting with her? Like, I don't know. But it seems like an interesting concept that I personally feel like would have been better than a good portion of the minigames that we did have throughout Remake, especially the goddamn pull-up minigame. Much would rather be fighting a fucking punching bag with Tifa than doing that shit. That also might be why there's a punching bag in Tifa's room, outside of her obviously being a martial artist who would probably practice in her free time. It might be like kind of a callback to the cut minigame that they were initially going to do. Similar to how there was initially going to be a basketball minigame whenever you take Jessie to her parents' house, but they decided to cut it because tonally it would have been weird because it's a very serious chapter. But that's why there's a basketball court there. But my dudes, I think that's going to be pretty much the video. This is way longer than I planned, but sometimes your boy just likes to talk, and maybe I have a beer or two in my system. I don't know entirely, but I want to pass off to you guys, of course. So the cut Tifa content is something we talked about before, but I don't think we've ever had the information that we have now that there's going to be an interlude between Chapter 8 and 9. I don't know if we've had that before, and the fact that like the devs want to show that at some point if they can. So it might be something that we do eventually see. It's just, I don't think it's anything we're going to see currently. But of course, what are your thoughts on everything else that we talked about? The Tifa punching bag minigame that could have been, but also the reunion stuff, black cloaked figures, the Punisher mode. I'm trying to remember what the fuck we talked about. I've been here for a long time. I'm losing my mind. I think that's going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't interested in more Final Fantasy 7 Remake / Rebirth content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter @YT. I'm a Discord. Links to the networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.